All right. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the July edition of the Radius community call. I'm Reshma. I'm a product manager with the Radius team. I'll be hosting today's community call. We have a jam-packed agenda today. We'll extend welcome to the new Radius community members joining the call. Share some updates on the Radius roadmap. Share some updates on our latest release, .35. And we have some cool demos on the latest features that got released as part of .35. The Azure workload identity support for Azure provider, and the nested modules in Terraform recipes. We also have a dedicated section to discuss our initial ideas and thinking about the user-defined types POC work that we've been doing. So we'll do that as well. And we'll open the floor for Q&A. Let's jump right into the call. So would like to extend welcome to the new members who are here and cover some logistics. This call is definitely for you. We are here to share the latest about Radius, what's happening behind the scenes, and what's upcoming. Please utilize the chat to ask any questions that you might have related to Radius. We have the Radius team here who can address your questions. Also, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand. We will unmute you. And we'll also have a dedicated Q&A at the end where you can ask questions as well. So let's cover some quick logistics here on receiving the email updates. So we have a dedicated Google group, RadApp.io. So for folks who are new here, please join the Google group to get the latest updates about Radius. So we share some like mails regarding the Radius release and community call invites. Other than that, we won't spam you much. So please do join the Google group to get the latest updates. So I'm going to pass it over to Will Sai to share some updates on the Radius roadmap.
Thanks, Reshma.
Over to you, Will.
Yeah, thank you so much. So every month during our community calls, I go through the roadmap and talk a little bit about what's been the most recent developments over the past month. As always, feel free to click into the link on this slide to go view our roadmap in GitHub. And when you view the board, you can actually click on every single one of these items and upvote them, add your comments, add your feedback. We're always listening, looking for ways to looking for feedback from the community. So please definitely go check it out. So the main things that over the past month that we've been working on, and we'll see some of the release highlights today. But we've made some very good progress on supporting workload and service identity. So we'll hear a little bit more about that later. But we're more than halfway done with that roadmap item. So we're on the verge of closing it out. So that's awesome. And then we're also halfway done with private registries for recipes. We've delivered Terraform, private Terraform modules. And now we are actively working on private bicep registries and making that available very soon. And then we're working through a couple more Terraform recipe enhancements, namely being able to configure any Terraform provider. And then also we're looking to containerize the Terraform recipe runtime just for easier maintainability going forward. And then a couple of things we pulled in into designing since last time we spoke. One of them is GitOps-based deployments. And I think we already pulled this in last time, but for those of you who didn't catch it last time, it's basically supporting tools like Flux or Argo CD with Radius, making sure that we have that integration that makes Radius work really well with those GitOps tools. We're starting designing in earnest the user-defined resource types, and this contributes to the overall extensibility of Radius. With user-defined resource types, you can come in with your custom types, define them, and deploy your custom resource types using Radius, and leverage all the all the benefits of being able to declare a custom type in Radius, things like validation and strong typing and things like that. And then one other thing, probably one of the more novel things that we pulled into our design queue is Dapper integration into the control plane. And I say novel because this is not something we had mentioned before in a previous community call, but we decided to bring in Dapper integration into the control plane because after some review of the benefits, we decided that Dapper brings to Radius a lot of sort of production readiness type features that we deem very favorable, not to mention that it also allows us to configure in the backend different data stores and pub sub technologies that you can use as your backing data store and your backing message queue for Radius. And we like how by integrating Dapper, we can get a lot of that kind of stuff for free. So Dapper integration into control plane is something that we're starting to look at and investigate now. And then, of course, we have a bunch of things in our accepted queue. I won't go through each one of those, but those are ordered in what we think is the current priority order based on feedback we've heard from the community and users. And like I said before, please go into the link and go comment on, vote for, upvote features that you like, and we'll take that as input to our prioritizations. Back to you, Reshma.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for those updates. So I'll share some quick updates on the features that got released as part of the .35 release. So you can now configure Azure, the Radius Azure cloud provider, to use Azure workload identity to deploy and manage Azure resources. So with this support, infrastructure operators are not burdened with this maintenance of or like the rotation of the credentials anymore. So this also introduces some breaking changes wherein the RAD credential register Azure CLI command is split into two. So previously we supported service principal as an identity. Now we are supporting additionally the workload identity. So RAD credential register Azure CLI command has become RAD credential register Azure workload identity. And then for service principal, it's just SP added to the RAD credential register Azure command. So those are the changes. Please try it out. I've linked the documentation for that. Please try it out and let us know what you think. The second feature that got released is the nested module support in Terraform recipes. So a couple of releases back, we supported the authentication to private repositories for pulling these Terraform recipes. Now with this release, we've additionally extended the support to pull Terraform recipes that contains nested modules as well. So the link attached goes over how to guide on like how to get the support working. So please take a look and let us know what you think. So both these features are going to be demoed later in the call today. The next feature up here is the enable WebSockets property added to the gateway route resource. So this is something that came from the community. So what we've added is that we've added a property to the gateway route resource so that it can be set by the Radius users to enable features that make use of WebSockets, such as SignalR. So I've linked the resource schema here. Please take a look to see how you can like add in the property if you have like specific scenarios that you need to enable in this case. So that's on the release side. So this is the full change log for this release. Kudos to everybody who has contributed to this release. We also had a community contribution. Nick Beenham has added the hyphen type for Go mock to generate type functions in a code base. Thanks to your contribution, Nick. And on the same lines, just wanted to cover some of the links here. So if you're new here and if you're interested to contribute to Radius, so Good First Issues link attached here is the the right one to get started with. So this covers issues that covers various parts of Radius, right from CLI to other like components within Radius. So if you are looking to contribute or to get started with the whole contribution path and Radius, you can like get started with one of these links. So the first link covers all the Radius first issues, covering the various components within Radius, CLI, everything. And the second one is specifically dedicated to the Radius dashboard first issues. And also, if you like have any questions related to the code changes that you need to make, like you need like more context on like where to go and make the code change, please engage with us in those issues. Or you can also use Discord to ask us questions. A Radius team member will be able to like help you with that. So this is on the contributions. Next, yeah, we'll jump onto the demos here. So Will Smith from the Radius team will be presenting on the Azure workload identity support for Azure provider. Over to you, Will.
Thanks, Rashma. Yeah, if there's any issues with the mic or the audio, please do let me know. I got my fancy podcasting mic right here, so hopefully it sounds good. All right, let me jump over to the demo. So, as mentioned, I'll be talking about the new Radius integration with Azure Workload Identity. And if you're unfamiliar with this technology, well, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but workload identities as a concept is essentially the idea that we don't want to be managing or rotating secrets when we authenticate to Azure. Or really any cloud provider. In this case, Azure. So Azure Workload Identity is built on that principle, and the idea is for a normal service principal authentication, which is what we do today in Radius, a client secret is required, but ideally we want to, for security reasons or otherwise, move away from that. So like I mentioned, many of you are probably familiar with how you set up the Azure Cloud Provider in Radius today. So you need a service principal and you need your application ID, password, and tenants. So these are all the required fields for setting up Radius to talk to Azure. And there are no other options until our most recent release, 0.35. So we've built this feature after some requests from the community to enable the Azure service or the Azure workload identity path for Radius. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So this docs page is brand new. It's brand new in this release, and this feature is also brand new in the release. So I'm going to go quickly over the docs page and then do the demo, which is kind of explained here in the docs page. And Reshma, if you wouldn't mind, could you send the short link in the chat? It was I think rad like aka.ms/rad workload identity. Yeah, that's the one. So cool. So let's get started. So there's a couple prerequisites. There's, you need to have CLI, rad CLI, Kubernetes cluster. In this case, I'm going to be working on an AKS cluster for ease of use. And there's this last step, which is some Azure Workload Identity specific things. But I'll cover that in the setup here. So this is some setup that we need to do on the Azure side to enable workload identity. And this is mostly analogous to creating a service principal and getting all of the information you need from that service principal. So I'm going to go ahead and take this script and run it. I have a copy of it on my local. So let's pop over to our terminal and let's see, I have the command somewhere. All right, so let's run this, and you see that I'm running it with my AKS cluster name and other Azure related things that we're going to need. So I'm going to run the script, and then I'm going to talk about what it's doing. So this script will create an Azure intra ID application. I think that's what they're called these days. In Azure, and it will create some federated credentials. So those of you who are very familiar with cloud providers probably know about this concept of these federated credentials. So we're not doing anything super crazy here. This is a very well-established pattern in Azure, packaged into like a script for your convenience because you know if you're a developer like I am, this is exactly what I would want to see on a docs page. This is the things that you need to do to enable the scenario. So we're going to be creating 3 federated credentials in Azure, and then we're going to be creating the service principal in Azure and assigning the role of owner to the resource group that we specified. So this is the same thing we do today with the service principal authentication. We just need to make sure that the service principal that we create, the application, has access to the resource group. So let's check and hope that it didn't fail. Looks pretty good to me. So that script did exactly what I just mentioned. And so let's go check it out. The presenter thing is a little bit in the way. There we go. Okay. Will Smith. I know the name of this because I've run this demo before, but it's just this is an Entra ID app in Azure. So we can see that we have some information, and then in the certificates and secrets section, there's going to be no client secrets, of course, because we're using workload identity, but we do have 3 federated credentials. And if you're curious, the 3 federated credentials correspond to the 3 radius control plane. So there's 3 separate services that we run in the radius control plane. Someday we want to condense these, but for now this is the case. So yeah, we have 3 federated credentials, one for each of the services that we need to connect to Azure from the Radius side. So this application and the federated credentials have access to the resource group where I'm going to be deploying resources. So all right, that's all the Azure stuff. And so now let's actually get into Radius, which is probably what you're more interested in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run everyone's favorite command, radinit, with the full option. And I'm going to select this Kubernetes cluster, AKS cluster that I have, defaults, all the normal defaults. We're going to take an Azure cloud provider, and then we're going to, oops, I think I might have done it wrong. Well, that's fine. Good thing we have such a good interactive flow. So we're going to use that Kubernetes cluster default namespace. We're going to add a cloud provider. We're going to use this subscription, and we're going to use a resource group that I already have. So it's my name, Will Smith, Dev. And now this is going to be new for everybody. Before, you didn't really have this option. You were locked into using service principal. Now we can try workload identity. And so we're going to need the app ID. We can get that from Azure here. So if we go over to the overview, convenient, and we need the tenant ID. So also use that one. And notice that we didn't have to specify any secrets or anything like that. And so we're not going to add any other cloud providers. We don't really need to set up an application. And let's try it. So we're going to go ahead and install Radius. So I've been getting some error issues, but don't worry about these. It's just warnings. So this Kubernetes cluster is like a month old. I think there's a policy problem on it, so don't worry about it. So we're going to install, and there we go. We're have workload identity set up on Radius 35, and if we check our cluster, we can see that the normal control plane pods exist, and rad credential. There we go. We have an Azure provider registered, and we have an Azure credential. So I'm going to get a little bit more technical here and talk briefly about what's actually happening in Radius behind the hood. So many of you may know that when you register a credential in Radius, actually what's happening is a Kubernetes secret is getting generated. So in this case, it's called this Azure Cloud default. And so if we decode the secret, which is something you probably never want to do in front of a presentation of, however many people we have, 30 people. This is not something you ever want to do if you have your secrets stored. But in this case, we're not having any secrets stored. We're just simply storing the tenant ID, client ID that we registered earlier. So this is what Radius is going to use to authenticate with Azure. And now I'm going to do the part where it actually does that. So I have the app here, which is just a very standard bicep file, not really any Radius things about it, but just for convenience and simplicity, this is an Azure Key Vault that we're gonna deploy to make sure that we can connect with Azure. So let's deploy that and see what happens. So you don't have to just, of course, do this with normal Azure resources. This is something that you could totally use with recipes. Any sort of Radius feature that we enable with normal Azure Service Principal authentication. We also enable or plan to enable with workload identity. So if you find any issues with your use case, please do let us know, because this feature is coming in hot, but we're doing all the testing we can. So so we see here we have our key vaults, and we can check in Azure. Let's see, I think Will Smith, what is it, dev? I can't remember the names of my own things. Nope, not this one. Will Smith dev. All right. So we have so many things in here. There we go. QS test. This is the name of our key vault. It's been deployed to Azure successfully using workload identity. So that reaches the end of the demo. And like I mentioned, if you have any interest in trying this out or using it, please do. And we have a docs page for all of the setup and all the things that I did here. One more thing I do want to note: I know I did use the init scenario, which is an interactive flow for simplicity. We do, of course, have all of the manual configuration set up to be able to register these commands. And this is something new here: rad credential register Azure WI for workload identity. So this is the one that's going to change for you. And I think that's it. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I'll answer any questions in the chat about this. I'm super excited to be presenting this as something that Reshma and I and many of the other team members have been working on for a bit. So it's super cool to see it finally getting demoed. So okay, I'll hand back over the slides.
Thanks, Will. Yeah.
Oh, I totally, yeah. I was just reading the chat. Totally, I wrote it in my notes and I didn't say it. We will be building out the AKS equivalent of, sorry, wow, I've said AKS so many times. The AWS equivalent of this. Wow, my brain completely forgot. Wow, that's not very cloud neutral of me to forget the name of Amazon's cloud provider. We're building out the AWS equivalent of this. They have a concept, or they have a service, or a feature called AWS IRSA URSA. IAM roles for service accounts, which is roughly analogous to Azure Workload Identity, which should allow us to prepare the same kind of demo on the AWS side. So that's in design, and it's getting towards feature completion. So stay tuned for that. We're building that out right now. So all right, that's it. No more ados. Thanks.
Thanks, Will. So next up, we have a demo from Vishwa on the nested modules in Terraform recipes. Over to you, Vishwa.
Yeah, thanks, Reshma. Hey everyone, good morning.
Stop
Uh,
sharing.
yeah, I'm Vishwa, and I'm going to demo on support for nested Terraform modules. So to give a bit of background, when we added support for private Terraform modules, Radius was able to access the modules that are stored in private Git sources, but failed when another private module is defined inside that module. So let me share my screen and show what I mean by nested module. Uh, yeah, let me know when you can see my screen.
We can see your screen, Vishwa.
Okay, awesome. So let's say if this is the module that is defined as a recipe in Radius.
Vishwa, can you make it bigger?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm just gonna do it.
We can see, but we can't read it.
Sure.
Okay,
Is it
that's
better?
better.
Okay,
Yeah, that's better.
awesome. Okay, so yeah, as I was saying, let's say this was a module that was used. This was a private module that is being used in the environment and defined as a recipe. And let's say the Radius is able to access this module, but if we have another block which defines a module property inside a Terraform module, then Radius was not able to access that was something was an issue, and we fixed it as part of 0.35. I'm going to show a quick demo of that, defining the nested modules and see it getting deployed successfully. So yeah, here are two bicep files. As an operator, I'm going to deploy an environment uh, which which defines a recipe, which is uh, here. I'm going to show that. So this is an extender recipe. Uh, start. Okay, cool. So if you see this, there is nothing defined inside. There is no resources defined inside this module. I'm defining one more module that points to the nested to, and I have recipes defined here. So if you see, I have a Kubernetes deployment resource which deploys a Redis container and a Kubernetes service. And we are pointing to nested.main, which doesn't really have anything, but for a module which points to nested2, which is also coming from a private module, if you see here. Okay. And I'm defining a recipe config for Terraform, which has information about the authentication for this GitHub repository, and I'm defining a secret store resource, which takes the personal access token and the username. Let me go deploy this environment. Username. I already have a personal access token created. I'm going to provide that here. Yeah. So I'm gonna have this environment deployed, and I have another file which is app.bicep. As a developer, I have an application and extender resource being defined here, uh, which uses this recipe. So yeah, I have this, and I'm going to deploy that application.bicep. Yeah, I think it takes a minute, but yeah, what we expect is like it should deploy successfully, and we expect to see the Redis Kubernetes deployment resource being deployed. No, it's successful. So good. Yeah, and we can see that the nested module, which has the Redis resource, is deployed successfully. Yeah, so this is all I had. And this is how we can use it. Like there is no change in the user experience. It was the same how it was for Terraform private modules. But it's just that we can, the users can add nested modules now when they're using Terraform modules. So yeah, that is all I had. Any questions? Cool.
Thanks, Vishwa. Thanks for the demo. Now I will pass it on to Ryan to talk about a cool topic.
Thanks, Reshma. It is a cool topic. It's so cool that I even made slides, which means that you're very, very special people, because I don't normally do that. So is that working okay, Reshma?
Yes, Ryan, we can see your screen.
Okay, cool. So hey, folks, I'm going to talk a little bit about user-defined resource types, and first I'm going to explain what that is. So if you feel a little bit lost, hopefully I can help you catch up. And I think this is the first time we've really talked about this at the community call, so it's pretty exciting. So and some of these slides are things that I'm repurposing, slides you may have seen before in other contexts or other presentations we've given. So I want to start with a pretty simple picture to help explain what user-defined types are. And I've got a kind of architecture diagram of an application here where we're going to get some traffic from the internet. There's maybe a front end, website that's talking to a Redis cache, and there's a backend container that's talking to a Mongo database. And this is a simple, elegant, common architecture that I'm sure we've seen before. The thing about it is it's a little bit sterile and a little bit fake. This is actually kind of ideal for us to talk about Radius, because the things that are being used by this app, the dependencies, if you will, Redis cache and Mongo database, are common things that you can run and host anywhere. So it's a good way for us to talk about not only building portable apps, building multi-cloud apps, but ways that Radius could apply to a variety of different scenarios. So if you're using non-proprietary technology like Redis or Mongo, and we could have the debate maybe about what proprietary means, but you get the idea. Things that are portable that can be run and hosted in other ways. If I wanted to run Redis in a container, I can do that. If I want a Redis cache in AWS, I can get one. That's what I mean. And that's the sort of ideal part of this, right? Is if I'm running locally, maybe I'm using containers to test those dependencies. If I'm going to Azure, I'm probably using some Azure hosted services that do the same thing. And if I'm going to AWS, I'm probably using the AWS equivalent. I'm sure you could draw the same picture for other clouds like GCP or IBM Cloud or Oracle Cloud. Like, the point is that if you're using these kind of standard technologies, there's good support for that. And so this is a picture that we show as well that kind of describes the way that we think about the world, right? So within applications, there are the things that are core resources that are kind of, compute networking storage type things. And then there are the standard resources, which is everything we would put in the category of open source-ish, either open source or open source adjacent, technologies like Dapper, things that you can run, in a variety of different hosting scenarios. They're typically tend to be open source, widely supported technologies. And then down below that, there are cloud vendor specific things coming from Azure and AWS. Clouds have their own proprietary services. Sometimes that's what you need. And we try not to be super opinionated about what technologies we support. We want you to be able to do what your application is already doing, or use whatever technology you think is right for your scenario. So maybe now you kind of get the idea of what we're talking about here, which is, well, okay, so what if you need something that isn't in Radius? Like we showed this picture before with a Mongo database. What if your example is Postgres or MySQL or some other technology that we haven't built support into Radius? And it's our ambition that we kind of do a couple things here. So first of all, we make it easy for you to enable things that you want to use. They could be commonly supported technologies that we just don't have support for in Radius. They could be things that are proprietary that we also don't have support for in Radius. Or maybe it's something specific to your scenario. You've got a special way that you think about a technology you're using, or you've got a homegrown service that you've built inside your company that just doesn't exist in the wild. And we've actually seen a lot of this as we've talked to folks. One of the most common scenarios for extensibility is, hey, there's a service inside my organization. We built it, we use it heavily. It's really important to our success. But it's also not really appropriate for building into Radius because it just doesn't make sense outside of our company. So providing some extensibility around the set of resources that you can say are part of your application is obviously kind of a core goal of ours. And the way that this sort of fits into, overall usage of Radius might be something like this. And you can see that there's some blue text there that I'm highlighting, which is, well, as a platform engineer, as an operations person, as the person, defining the strategy for your organization, part of that role is that you're going to choose the set of technologies that are supported, the things that are strategic to you. And so wouldn't it be nice if you could maybe filter the list of things that are in Radius by default, or you could add your own, or you could change the way that things work. And that's really what this feature is about. So I'm going to switch gears. That hopefully establishes some context for the demo you're about to see. And I'll take questions when I'm done showing the demo, by the way. I will warn you, despite, don't get too excited about what you see. I hope the demo doesn't come across as too polished. It's actually not very polished under the hood. We want feedback on the idea if we kind of have the idea right here. I will want to say that there's lots of limitations. Like this is in a feature branch now. All the code is public. You can look at it if you want. But you're not going to find some of the things you're seeing in the demo in the current release of Radius, and it may be a couple of releases before you see them. We really want to get this right. And then lastly, this is all command line only for now. So it's not going to, maybe not going to flow as well as some of the other demos we give because I'm going to be, jumping around. So with that, I'm going to switch and we'll jump into some code, some demo. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Is that coming through pretty well, Reshma?
Yes, Ryan, we can see obviously.
Okay, thank you. So here's an example of a demo app that we give, and I like to demo with this app because it's kind of small enough to fit on the screen. And now's a good time as any to talk about what I mean by user-defined type. So if I trigger completion here, I'll just do resource foo. Everything that's in these applications core or applications namespaces, so applications core, Dapper, data stores, messaging, these are all things that come with Radius. They're kind of built in. And we wrote code inside Radius as a system to handle these. So when you put this in a bicep file or you use the command to interact with containers or gateways or any of these kind of things, there is code on the back end that is processing those things, and it is code we wrote. Unfortunately, you can see that this list is kind of small, right? Maybe inappropriately so, because, well, what if my scenario is Postgres, right? I want to put Postgres in here and build an application that looks a lot of the same way, but I'm using a different technology. And that's the kind of thing that this feature is going to let you do. And this isn't working yet, but I'm just going to show you an example so it sinks in is, well, what if I could put something like this, this could be my company's namespace. It could be something that comes from the upstream project, but you kind of get the idea. What if my definition for something like Postgres could live alongside the things that are built into Radius, and it would have all the same features, and it would work in the same way? The only difference is who built it, how it got shipped, things like that. So that's where we're going with this. You can obviously see from the red text that the editor is very unhappy about this. There is no punchline. It's not working yet. And so like bicep isn't working yet for this feature. I'm just going to kind of skip over bicep because we're not going to use it for the rest of the demo, but wanted to help position where this is going to end up. So now we're going to switch to the command line and do things in a much more primitive way. So one of the first things I'll show you is, well, we can get the same list of stuff at the command line. So I triggered completion before and showed you the list of types in bicep. The list that I'm showing you here on the command line is actually dynamic. This actually went to the API and said, hey, API, what set of types do you know about this? And this is pretty valuable for introspection, but I think we could do a little bit more. I could do something like this. I could say rad resource provider create. I could put in a name. I could put in a manifest file, which I'll show these in a sec. I'm going to kind of start the demo, and then while it's running, I'll explain everything. So I could do that. I hit the API, got some API output back. We can look at that a little bit later. And if I run rad resource type list again, this is the exciting part, you can see that our definition for Postgres is now part of the API. So somehow through some kind of magical incantation, I was able to dynamically affect the set of types that Radius knows about. We could do a little bit more. We could interact with this. So I could say rad resource list, and I'll put in my new Postgres type. And this is kind of cool because I can list these, and obviously there aren't any because I haven't created any yet, but you can see that, well, I didn't have to build an API endpoint for this. If you're familiar with how like CRDs work in Kubernetes, this probably all feels really familiar to you. I didn't have to build a microservice that handles this. I can just ask, the Radius API, hey, do you know about this? And we're handling it for you. So I didn't have to build this list functionality or write any backend code. The other cool thing would be really cool if this could work with recipes. So you could imagine that we're going to take a definition like this, and then let's write a recipe that's going to work with that. So I've actually got one here. I've got a Postgres recipe that I wrote, and this is just a bicep one. And I'm doing really simple stuff because this is a demo. So I'm just going to run Postgres in Kubernetes, but you could imagine that I'm going to use RDS to deploy Postgres on AWS, or you can imagine that I'm going to create a hosted Postgres in my own data center, or do whatever makes sense for your scenario. What I'm doing here is I'm taking this size property in from the user. Based on that size, I'm going to allocate an amount of resources to the database. And then I'm just going to deploy that in Kubernetes. We're very humble here. And then like normal with a recipe, I'm going to return some data back to Radius so that we can understand how to connect to this thing. And that's what's going on here. And like, there really isn't anything very different about this recipe. It's kind of a lot like other recipes you've seen if you've seen these demos before. I didn't have to do anything differently because this is a user-defined type. It's actually a goal that it would work the same. The next thing that I would need to do with this recipe is I would publish it. So rad bicep publish. Actually, I'm going to skip this because I already did it. I'll publish that to container registry. In the next release, it could be a private container registry, but I digress. The other thing that I need to do is I need to register that recipe. So I'm going to register that again using my custom type that I defined and my recipe that I just defined. So we've now got that recipe as part of the environment. And then I've got a new command here, rad resource create. Again, this is not working yet with bicep, so I'm just doing things at the command line. I had to invent a way to do this at the command line because I knew that bicep support would take a while. So I can create a Postgres database. I'm giving it a little JSON payload, and that's going to start spinning because we're now executing that recipe and standing up that database. While this is running, let me talk you through a couple of the things that you see. So the first thing that we did is we registered a type with Radius, and that's what's going on here in this manifest. So we've defined a little bit of a manifest here. I just want to point out a couple things. This is where I said what type I'm defining. I said that the routing is internal here, meaning that like Radius is just going to handle this for me. If I had another microservice that handled the lifecycle of this and Radius, we're going to call into it, call the resource provider. I can do that too. That's actually how the built-in stuff works. Just this is a little easier, or I should say a lot easier. And then I'm defining an API version and I'm providing an open API v3 schema in it so that Radius can understand what the data is going to look like. We already talked about the recipe. That was the next step. And then the last step is this is just the payload of the resource. So if you ever wondered about like, why is bicep useful for this scenario? The answer is that there's a lot of magic happening. So this is what the wire protocol format looks like by the time it gets to the API. Hopefully, as a user, you never have to see this, even if you're troubleshooting something. But as somebody building a feature, I had to do it. And then if we scroll down here, you can see that this completed correctly. Again, we're just looking at some very raw API output because this is kind of a primitive demo still. Hopefully next time we show this, it'll feel a little bit more like a polished scenario. But you can see that we created our Postgres database. It was called example. You can see that the size was small. Here you can see the data that came back that's going to get used for connections if we make a connection to this. And then you can see that we cataloged the resources that were part of this as the app graph, and we have some information about the recipe. So hopefully this feels a lot like the things that Radius can already do. What I think is cool about this is I didn't have to write any code. So like, you know, if you've ever felt like building the support for new APIs in Radius is kind of a daunting thing, it's a little bit of a rite of passage for new members on the team for us is to go build one of these things. That's probably not going to be the case going forward because we found a much easier way to build them. And so it's pretty cool that I could get something like this working, support recipes, connections, app graph without having to build any backend code for it. Hopefully this feels easy enough. I think we're going to do some more work to make things like writing this manifest easier because I still feel like this is kind of ugly and kind of complicated, but hopefully this feels like the right thing. So that's the end of what I want to show for demo. I'll hand it back to Reshma, and if there's questions about it, we can answer them during Q&A.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for the demo. I'm going to quickly bring in these slides here. So just to wrap up, just wanted to highlight some of the links here. So that's the Discord channel where we are active. So if you have any questions or if you need any troubleshooting assistance, please engage with us there. Start our GitHub repo. As I mentioned earlier, join the radapp.io Google group to receive the latest Radius news. We'll be back soon with our next community call date. Please let us know what you think and what you would like to see in the next community call. With that, we'll open the floor for any questions. I'll quickly check if there's anything left in the chat to be answered. Cool. So yeah, if you happen to have any questions, let us know in Discord. We should be able to help there. Thank you so much for joining the call today. See you in the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.